I've been called to order. It is Monday, 5 o'clock p.m., and this is the Nashville Community Review Board monthly meeting for the month of February. I will now read the appeal statement. Pursuant to the provisions of 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Review Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. Mr. Secretary, do we have a quorum?
We do, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much. We will now have Metro Legal Director remarks. Director Wallace Dietz.
And members of this board, good evening.
Good evening. Is your mic on? Well, there we go.
Okay, now, how's that? All right, good evening. I wanted to say at the outset, unfortunately, I have some very severe time constraints. I had a pre-existing commitment to appear in front of Chair Joy Stiles' Arts Committee at 6 o'clock tonight up at the courthouse. And so I regret that I cannot stay for this meeting. And so I must leave soon after my remarks to fight the traffic to get back to the courthouse. But I am here to address concerns about some of the events that transpired at the last meeting of this Community Review Board. At that meeting, there was a very robust discussion and frankly some disagreement about the facts surrounding the question of whether there is any basis for Metro to sue the state over the statute that removed significant powers from the Community Oversight Board. The COB came into existence after a charter amendment was approved by a very strong majority of the voting public. During that discussion at the last meeting, Associate Law Director Laura Fox expressed her frustration and started to leave the meeting. Laura Fox is an exceptional attorney who has a true commitment to public service. That commitment led her to volunteer to represent the COB and the CRB through the difficult transition from the summer of 2023 to today. Attorney Fox recognizes, as do I, that expressing her frustration in the way that offended many of you and fell short of the high standards of professional service we aspire to at the Department of Law. She has asked me to express her apology to you on behalf of Attorney Fox, myself as Law Director, and the entire Department of Law. I apologize without qualification. Full stop. We are hopeful that we can move forward and look forward to a working relationship with the CRB in a constructive fashion. I am discussing next steps with your chair on how we can best advise, represent, and support this board going forward. As I mentioned, I regret that I must leave immediately to go back up to the courthouse, but I do appreciate this opportunity and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Before you go, I'm not going to hold you long because I know you have to get back, and we do understand that you have a previous obligation at the courthouse. So first of all, thank you for coming, and thank you for your sincere apology. Full stop. It was a very tense moment, but it was a exceptional community engagement that we received last month. And for you to be here today to express your sentiments and those of Laura Fox, we appreciate that. Director Dietz, we know that this has not been an easy road over the past year, being under the assault of the Tennessee General Assembly. And we do thank you for what you've done for the CRB, for us to transition from the COB to the CRB. And so we hope to continue to have a working relationship with you. And I know we're still trying to find the right fit for a Metro legal attorney with the CRB, and I know we're dedicated to doing that. So I want to say thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have some thoughts about
Okay.
the next attorney for the CRB. So I'd ask that we try to arrange some time to talk on the phone.
That'd be great.
Later this week, because I'm ready to discuss that thoroughly with you.
All right, that sounds good. Any other comments? Joe? Member Brown?
I have one question, Director. It involves our budget. That in our proposed budget, we've got an item for outside attorney. My reading was that outside attorney, if it's decided that we do need one, that Metro Legal pays for it. And my question is, if Metro Legal does not find a conflict, that we would have really no authority to hire an outside attorney.
That is my evaluation of the state law, which directs every community review board or committee to utilize the work of the city attorney unless there is a direct conflict, in which case I, in this instance, would declare a conflict and permit the CRB to obtain independent counsel to deal with that conflict situation. That engagement would be at the expense of Metro Legal.
Okay. That was my understanding.
Not the CRB. And I do want to say that I have previously, earlier this month, authorized the engagement of independent counsel for this CRB to negotiate an MOU with the MNPD. I believe that's in the best interest of all the parties. It will give you comfort that you are getting truly independent legal advice, and I approved that a couple of weeks ago. That will be at our expense.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brown. Director Dietz, in what instance would a department, and just in general, pay for legal consultation outside of the Metro Law Department?
We do that. We've done that some, Madam Chair, with our litigation against the state,
Okay.
where we brought in outside counsel. We, in certain lawsuits, we do not have the internal expertise to pursue those claims. For example, we had a very large disaster claim against FEMA that's been going on for 10 years. There is a firm in Tennessee that has an office in Jackson, Mississippi that does that. That's all they do, is litigate against FEMA. We engaged them because they had particular subject matter expertise that we did not have. Sometimes we bring in outside counsel to conduct an independent review of allegations that are made about the operations of a Metro department, where we have outside counsel come in and do an investigation or an interview of relevant employees, and then they report back to us. Those are just some of the examples that come off the top of head.
Okay. So just in general, even though all of the boards, if you deem it necessary or there's a conflict, Metro Legal will essentially foot the bill for what you have approved, just like our MOU. But are there instances where a department would pay for outside legal consultation for themselves? Is there any instance can you think of?
We have a tax attorney who is assisting Ms. Wilhoit, Vivian Wilhoit, in the performance of her functions in that office, where she asked for an attorney and she's paying for
Okay.
that attorney's services. She believed that the time demands and the expertise that was required, it would be better for her to go outside. We gladly worked with her on that relationship, and that's been going on for over a year now.
Oh, okay, okay. I just wanted to know if there were any instances outside of what we read in the law.
The charter requires the director of law to direct all legal services for every Metro Department, agency, board, and commission. That's in the charter. And so there needs to be something extraordinary for us to deviate from that mandate, which is in our charter.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, thank you, Director Deeds.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Good evening.
Okay.
Before we get started.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hall.
No problem, not pretending.
Oh, okay.
Before we get started, we got a recording going on. Could we put the nameplates in front of each person? Because I think
is
Mary Beard's name is on the far end and Mark Wynn name.
No, it's, yeah, just slide George to the center.
So that's just for television purpose. Exactly, you're right.
Thank you, Member Holloway. All right, we will now move to the approval of minutes. We received the minutes a few days ago. We all had a chance to read them.
Yeah, I have a few corrections to the minutes.
Okay,
So we've made them on our end, but I just wanted to make notification for, so that you know.
okay.
One of them is, and we need to probably start numbering these things instead of bullets, because then you'll know where I'm at. So the first one is Laura Fox. Her name was misspelled. That's been corrected under attendees. The next one is under number 6, the second bullet, this misspelling of the mayor's name. Just one, something was left off on there. And, okay, and, well, let me see. I think those were the only two. Whatever one, we caught them all, though. There was one other one, I just don't know where it is.
I saw the same
Okay.
thing, yeah. And it was just, I will blame that on spell check because, no, seriously though, if you didn't hit spell check,
Oh, I know
then
where
of
it
course.
is. Okay, the other one is on the very first bullet where it says absent Joe Brown and Mark Wynn, and then it has absent on the second line too.
That's
So we've
where it
made those
was.
corrections.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Okay, we have a motion. Thank you, Member Brown. All in favor? Aye, all right. So we have approved board minutes from Monday, January 29th, 2024. All right, we'll now move on to our chair remarks. I will just give a few brief remarks. Thank you for joining us today, this evening for the Nashville Community Review Board February board meeting. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for your continued support of this board and also your support of the issue surrounding police accountability and transparency in Nashville. Last month's board meeting was very well attended and had exceptional community engagement. And because of the attendance and the exceptional community engagement, we had, as Director Dietz described, a robust conversation around the litigation or lack thereof for the Community Review Board. And so it really encouraged me that the community is still very involved and very engaged around the subject of police accountability and transparency, but more importantly, continue to be engaged regarding the assault that we have come under from the Tennessee General Assembly. And so what I witnessed last month was the continued support that we received from the Nashville community. And not only from individuals within the community, but from community organizations. And I'm going to speak of one community organization that didn't just show up to last month's meeting, but they showed up after the meeting and they continued to support us throughout this time. And that's the NAACP. They hosted us last month this month for a meeting to engage with the law director, Wally Dietz. And so what that resulted from was the behavior that was exhibited by Laura Fox, but also that Mr. Dietz just apologized for. But what was more staggering is that not only did Director Dietz show up, but board members showed up and the community showed up. And the historical institution of the NAACP showed up. And so what I want us to remember and what I want us to all keep in the front of our minds is that this fight isn't over. We have so many more hills to climb. But what's encouraging is that we're not climbing these hills alone. We have continued to engage in the hard conversation of what police accountability and transparency will look like in Nashville, Davidson County. And so just by you being here speaks volumes about your commitment to ensure that fairness, equity, justice, all of those things are exhibited throughout our local government and how we engage in the matters of public safety. So thank you to everyone that came last month. Thank you to those who are here today, but also thank you for not just providing lip service. Thank you for providing the type of support that we need to carry on and to carry the Community Review Board on to what we know it can be. And that's an exceptional department that is committed to the public safety of all Nashvillians and not just a few. So thank you for joining us. That will conclude my remarks, and we will move on to public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? No one. Okay. Yes, we do have someone. Mr. Timothy Hughes with the NAACP.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on behalf of the NAACP Nashville branch, we want to thank the members of the Community Review Board and Madam Chair for your leadership. And thank you to Wally Dietz for being here to give those remarks earlier. I just wanted to be appreciative of the work of the board as a former member of the Community Oversight Board. I know that this is not a small task. I know that there are many challenges that the board is facing with preemption from the state and some of the challenges that are happening in the community. I also want to give a special appreciation to Director Fitchard for her leadership and for her work and for her efforts to include the Nashville Community Review Board and the Nashville NAACP in the proceedings going forward. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. As your former colleague, I wish you all the best as we continue these efforts together. Thank you for your leadership and for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. That concludes our public comment, but before we conclude our public comment, guess what I'm going to do? Read the public comments statement. Pursuant to TCA 8-44-1, a period of public comment is reserved to provide the public with the opportunity to comment on matters that are germane to the items on the agenda. Each speaker is allowed up to 2 minutes to speak. Speakers may register in advance by signing up on the public comment sheet located at the entrance to the meeting room. Just remember what Mr. Hughes said. Okay, thank you. All right, so now we will have our Executive Director report and presentation. Director Fitchard.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. So you guys received a lot of information. I've given you the case information and then I sent some things to you. We had a meeting with the MOU committee that happened last week. The members of that committee is Member Goddard, he's the chair. Member Brown and Member Nguyen was present. And so we went and met over at the Bordeaux Library and discussed the MOU. And we still have work to do on that. So you have any comments on that?
I just said we got through the existing MOU.
Yeah, hit the button.
There we go. We got through the existing MOU, both to see what of that we wanted kept in, what of that probably went out with the new statute, and what we wanted improved. Got all the way through that, which I thought was a good amount of work for the first meeting. We've got to go back and look at the standard operating procedures that are referenced in the MOU and put those together. And then I think we'll be ready to talk about having a meeting date with the police department.
Great. And we also need to, I didn't talk about the.
Let me, so when will we engage with an attorney? When will that happen throughout the process?
I would hope it would happen fairly soon,
Okay.
right away.
Have we thought about anyone to engage with?
We had a discussion of the need to, that we've been approved and we need to pick an attorney, but no one had suggestions for a specific attorney
Okay.
at that meeting. I would encourage anyone up here or out there who's got ideas, it would be good to let Jill know if you corral those, Jill, and I'll do the same.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and so we also, one of the things that we haven't, memorialized yet is our bylaws and rules. So we need to probably set up a bylaws and rules committee meeting if you want to go over that. I mean, we have the draft version. You and I met with Laura Fox on that, but we haven't adopted the new bylaws and rules, and I think it's important that we do that. Although the rules go hand in hand with probably the MOU agreement and how we, and some other things. So, but at least the bylaws could be, I mean, right now we've adopted the ones from the COB, but we do need to do that and get that on the books. Okay. I had a meeting with the mayor's administration. It was Kristen Wilson and the chief of staff, Marjorie Pomeroy Wallace, and just went over some things, asked about the needs of our department, asked about how we were moving forward. I shared the PowerPoint presentation so that they would have some idea of what the department is, how we are going to be working. Talked a little bit about metrics, which is something that Kristen handles for the mayor's office anyway, and then scheduling a monthly meeting with her. She says she does that with several other departments, and we are going to get that on the calendar. The next thing is the fiscal year 25 budget. We have a budget meeting tomorrow. I'm going to skip that one and come back to that one last, since I know everyone wants to kind of chime in on that. We did some hiring, so we're in the middle of hiring staff, and so we had the AD interviews on Friday, and so we have sent out letters for the top 4 candidates, and so they will be moving forward in the process. And as I mentioned, myself, Ms. Barnett, and Chair Haddock will be conducting those interviews, and that will be later on this week, Thursday and Friday.
Their understanding, they must be residents of Davidson County.
Yeah, so all of that information was on the front end from the Human Resources Department. So they checked to make certain that they were a resident, and whatever other stipulations before they even forwarded the information to me.
I believe under the new statute, only the executive director has to be a resident of Davidson County. I think you're free to
A
hire
resident,
outside.
I think yes, you're right. They only have to be a resident. The only person that has to be a resident is myself.
Right, so you're free to hire outside the county if that's the best candidate.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think everybody lives in the city, if I can recall. Yeah, that's right.
Do the candidates have to be registered voters?
No, all of that's gone away.
Okay.
I think that they have to be, only people that have to be registered voters are the board members. Those stipulations no longer apply to employees, only the executive director.
Okay.
Right, who has to be a registered voter and live in Davidson County.
Okay.
Hint, hint, I got But anyway, yeah, Mr. Holloway, I don't think that those are stipulations for employees any longer. It used to be, but not any longer, just for board membership. All right, the rental, so I got some information back from the Department of Property about this move. And so they said that the lease agreement was finally finalized from the company that owns the building, and it has gone forth to Metro Legal to be approved before it can go through council. So once it's approved, then it'll go to the council, and hopefully they will expedite that process. I just don't know how we would be able to move in May, to be honest with you. I mean, it's March, and we haven't had any instruction on that, so I'm assuming that, I don't like to assume these things, but I would think that we would have to extend our lease for 90 days or however long, because the cabling and everything has to be done at that place to get us ready. And we also need to, to do some little updates to it, like put in some cabinetry and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not really sure. They haven't told me anything else. I did ask for a follow-up. I sent you the information. So I'm waiting for that now for Metro Property to give me some more information. But it still is a process. It has to go through Metro Council and get it has to go through the 3-vote thing. So we're waiting on that as well. So I'll let you know as soon as I find out as well. Case management information, I sent that to you. I'm sorry, I gave it to you. We went over this. These are the cases that we have now. I'm sorry they're not numbered. I thought that they were, but they are on the spreadsheet. But then when I put it in a PDF, it's not. But it's up to date. And so that's how many cases that we have, and that's how many cases that we've received back from the OPA. And I wanted to acknowledge Ms. Moranti, Director Moranti, Kathy Moranti, who's here. Commander Lara could not make it. He is out of the country. And so Ms. Moranti is here in his stead. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it. And then as it pertains to case management, the case management system, the reason why you have this is because the system that we have, I told you about the IA Pro system. So I have an email to go to Judge Dalton to set that meeting up so that we can determine when, if she's going to, her and the committee will approve us moving to the JIS platform. Metro ITS has said that they think that the JIS platform is better because they do more case management. They have built out new case management systems. I know they did that for the Public Defender's Office when they switched over from what they had to Defender Data, which was something that had to be built out. And so I think that they have the capacity, assuming Metro ITS, because they made that, the director made the suggestion that we go to the JIS system, that the build out may be more than they are able to do. So anyway, I have to meet with them to go through the panel to explain and get a justification on why we want to do that. And like I said, we will probably move forward with sole source, since Mr. Rice, the civil platform is strictly for the work that we do. Like I said, I think his growth of police departments and civilian departments has grown a lot since he started a few years ago. So anyway, that's all I have on that. And we continue to receive contact calls. You can see from this moment, this time, how many cases we have, but this is just representative of the amount of cases that we've sent over, not the many calls that come in and that we refer out to other agencies or departments across the state, not only in the city. And so that kind of concludes my report, and I'll take any questions. Oh, I wanted to talk about budget, sorry. So I sent you the budget information that we submitted. There was some questions about that. I know Drew had some questions. It has a lot of information on there. As a new department, I did want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we have on there. Addressing what happened to the COB is important. I mean, as we're talking about moving forward, the hardships that we've experienced as a department, as well as the harm that it caused, not only for the department, but for the community. And so I know that my request seemed pretty robust. But I think it's necessary for the work that we do, and also to show this community that we are concerned and we take, as much as we can, take accountability to making certain that their concerns, their complaints are heard, and that we take them seriously, and that we're here to support them in any way that we can. So I'll take any questions.
Have any questions?
I mean, there's MOUs later on the discussion as
It
well.
is.
Is this the full MOU discussion?
No,
or-
this is the director's
That's fine.
report. Yep, you're welcome. So any comments or questions regarding the director's report? Okay. Thank you, Director Fisher. Does that conclude your report
It
and
does.
presentation?
It does.
Okay.
Not the presentation, no. The presentation it moves us right into the use of force report. So
Right.
I am going to talk a little bit about that and just kind of do an opening for the use of force report. And since it's Black History Month, I wanted to open with. Okay. Right, mine too. All right, so we're talking, this entire presentation is going to move us right into the use of force report. So it's going to talk a little bit about data and why this information is important. So Toni Morrison, in her book, The Source of Self-Regard, on wisdom in the age of information, she states, in all of our education, whether it's in institutions or not, in homes or streets or wherever, whether it's scholarly or whether it's experiential, there is a kind of progression. We move from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. And separating one from the other, being able to distinguish among and between them, that is, knowing the limitations and the danger of exercising one without the others, while respecting each category of intelligence, is generally what serious education is about. And if we agree that purposeful progression exists, then you will see that it's easy and it's seductive to assume that data is really knowledge, or that information is indeed wisdom, or that knowledge can exist without data. And how easy and how effortlessly one can parade and disguise itself as another. And how quickly we can forget that wisdom without knowledge, wisdom without any data, is just a hunch. And so this information that I'm going to share with you, some of it came from it was a release from, it was hosted by Witness, Invisible Institute, and the National Association of Lawyers, and it's called Obtaining, Organizing, and Opening Police Misconduct Data. So data about policing practices began to attract increased attention in the late 1990s, when data demonstrating racial profiling in traffic stops and at airports came to light through litigation and the U.S. Department of Justice investigations. Increased availability of data on police practices had significantly impacted public safety discourse in major cities like Chicago, New Orleans, New York City, San Francisco, and others, and in individual and impact litigation. People directly impacted by police violence, advocates, attorneys, and so forth, have used aggregated information about the impacts and cost of policing to fight for changes, both big and small, supported by data that contextualizes and affirms the stories they seek to tell. Increased availability of data about policing has also enhanced our collective ability to recognize patterns, identify root causes, and generate creative solutions to address many public safety issues, including police violence. Despite these the increased availability of data through legislation and open data initiatives, police departments, as we have seen, continue to cherry pick the information they agree to proactively disclose and to resist public information demands. The information obtained through litigation is consistently subject to protective orders, keeping it from the public, and police complaint mechanisms continue to be inadequate to the task of documenting the scope and harms of police activity, and they pose risk and barriers to the complainants that come forth. So why do we collect, aggregate, and publicize data about policing? Number one, to gain a greater understanding of the full scope and reach of police violence and to arrive at responses that address its root causes. Two, to highlight patterns and practices of racial or other forms of discrimination in policing, such as racial disparities in traffic stops, street stops, frisks, or searches. To surface specific forms, contexts, and sites of police violence, and to identify violent or corrupt officers, units, or departments, and to shift mainstream narratives around policing practices, tactics, and outcomes. So where does the data about policing come from? It comes from the police departments themselves, civilian oversight agencies, investigative journalism, courts, and community documentation. So shifting and shaping the narrative of police violence, gathering knowledge about policing from individual and community perspectives versus only the official police-generated data, encouraging the public to look beyond singular, spectacular incidents of violence, such as police killings, to the often less visible everyday uses of force, exposing what community policing and co-response teams look like from the community's perspective, and capturing experiences of particular communities often left out of data and discourse about policing, such as women, queer, trans people, migrants, people in the sex trades, and disabled people, and documenting how they experience policing. And so why is this report needed, this use of force report? Because it brings awareness to who, how, and where force is used in Nashville. It lifts community voices related to uses of force by MMPD. It creates the opportunity to have a convening of stakeholders to acknowledge community harms, strategize on concepts that foster collaborative solutions to public safety concerns. And it has recommendations that will enhance and improve MMPD policies, procedures, and accountability measures. And it supports the need for the continuation of data sharing for the improvement of public and community safety of all. And I just wanted to address some of these historical, since it is Black History Month, and this is what was going on in the 60s during the sit-ins here in Nashville. And as we talk about policing and where we've gone, this was over 55 years ago. And so I think it's important that we continue to raise these issues and continue to create reports that show what's happening here and where we're improving. I think that we have come a long way, but I also think that there is still opportunity for improvement. Thus, I think our use of force report will highlight those things and those recommendations. And I'm just gonna close out with these. If you saw what was happening 55 years ago and where we landed with George Floyd and during this particular march that you see here, that was in 2021. And so as we commemorate this month, let's not overlook the influence of our voices, the value and importance of community, and the significance and need for police accountability. Thank you. Right? And Ms. Catherine Gracie Rule is going to now move forward with the use of force report.
And this is the finalization of the use of force report, correct?
That's correct.
All right.
All right, good evening, board members. I'm going to jump right in. This is our final report of the use of force report. Thank you, Director Fitchard, for such rich context as we travel into this report and the findings. I'm really excited to present to you all that data, that information that we've gathered that we can hopefully translate into knowledge and with wisdom use to implement here in Nashville and in our police department. I want to start off by giving some background information about the use of force report itself. So it's important to remember as we ground ourselves in this report that the COB and now the CRB came out of a legacy and response of police violence in our community and want to hold the serious impact that police violence has on folks in our community, particularly folks of color, as we go through this report. And just to remember and center that as we look at these numbers, these are human lives that are being impacted and not just numbers on the screen. To provide some national context, 1.8% of police civilian contacts involve the threat or use of force, and about 4% of arrests involve more force than necessary to handcuff a compliant subject. And this, while these numbers are small, have serious implications for those people who are victims of police violence, as often exposure to excessive force leads to raised anger, anxiety, and lower levels of trust and approval of police, not only from victims, but also from their community members as well. High-profile police misconduct lawsuits also cost taxpayers large sums of money each year, which is important to think about as we go forward into budget season as well. To kind of focus us a little bit, research suggests and highlights a lot of important details about the disparate use of force in many contexts. So we see that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more likely than white people to have force used against them, to be killed in police encounters, and to be unarmed during fatal police shootings. In other cities, we're seeing that in Black neighborhoods, white officers are firing their firearms at much higher rates than Black officers for similar calls. Other police departments, such as Chicago police, are more likely to stop, use force, and use severe force against Black people, even after taking crime levels and subject actions into account. And 40% of LGBT survivors of violence who interacted with the police reported police misconduct like unjustified arrest, excessive force, or entrapment. So as we enter the use of force report, these are kind of some of the ideas we're taking into account. And we see these trends follow for Black youth as well. Overall, we're seeing a trend in adultification nationally of Black youth, assuming that Black boys are older, less innocent, and more responsible for their actions, and that Black girls need less nurturing protection and support. And all of this contributes kind of to how police departments across the country and here in Nashville are interacting with Black youth, which we'll get into in our data section of this report. There's also extensive research that compares force levels to resistance levels, which is definitely a very standard thing in policing data that we'll take a look at as well in this report. And the ultimate framing kind of this report is to look and see how these trends are translating within MNPD, whether they are, what trends emerge here, and what can be done to curb these disparities if they are arising within our police department and in our community as well. So some of the research questions specifically to frame this report include how much force is used annually by MNPD officers, against whom is force used, which officers are using force, spatially where is force concentrated, what's the relationship between resistance levels and use of force, and just highlighting any unique trends over the time period in question. So I'll jump right into the data analysis. This graph on this slide shows you the number of reported use of force incidents by year over the time period of 2018 to 2022. And we can see two large spikes in this graph that are notable in 2019 and 2022. In 2019, this is when MNPD began tracking firearm displays as a force type, which accounts for that large jump. And again, in 2022, this is when MNPD began tracking soft, empty hand controls that did not lead to injury. So before 2022, soft, empty hand control was being tracked, but only if it led to an injury, which is important to note for another graph later. Also important to note that that increase in tracking was due to a COB recommendation that MNPD implemented previously. When we break down the overall use of force by force type, we can see these large jumps. Our purple line is that soft, empty hand control, and that green line, let's see, maybe I can point. Yeah, purple line, soft, empty hand, and then this is firearm displays right here. And so we can see that those are accounting for a lot of the force types in that data set that I showed before. When we break these out, again, excluding those two outliers, we can see overall most force types are showing pretty consistent low levels. Two notable trends are this decrease in takedowns, which is this purple line, and this increase in taser deployment over between 2020 and 2022, which is something we could continue to monitor with future data. Next, these graphs demonstrate kind of a bit more about the overall trends with that soft empty hand and firearm display excluded. So we can see pretty much that force is tracking pretty consistently, maybe a slight uptick in 2022 in that left-hand graph. And then the right graph shows that soft empty hand control that resulted in injury, which is what I was saying had been tracked this whole time. And we can see a slight decrease in 2020 and 2021, but another uptick in 2022. So something to consider for future studies. I'm next going to go into a series of graphs that display use of force incidents by race. An important note on benchmarking before I do that, in criminology, we like to benchmark our data sets compared to other law enforcement interactions because we know already that law enforcement tends to have an overrepresentation of people of color, specifically Black folks, within these types of data. And so I think it's important to not acknowledge that not only are we comparing the rates of use of force against population data, but also arrest data. And the facts and figures that I'm going to show are those that have gone above and beyond the percentage of arrest data. So thinking about the percentage of folks who have been arrested, if that disparity is greater in use of force, those are the graphs that are going to be presented. And I also want to acknowledge that, you know, this data, while we use benchmarking as an important tool, it's also important to note that the disparity that people of color are interacting with the police in arrest data and other data is a crucial issue to address overall in criminology. So we'll get into this data analysis. First, we have the annual use of force incidents by race. That's that overall data that I showed broken out by each race displayed here. And so in this data, we can see that there is an overrepresentation of Black folks and force used against Black folks across all years, and that goes above and beyond the arrest rate at which Black folks are being arrested. And we see the same trend with Hispanic folks as well in this data set. I'm going to go through a couple more graphs that look kind of like this for each force type broken out. So next is going to be our annual firearm displays by race. And again, we can see an overrepresentation in the data. And this is, we found that in this data set, Black folks were experiencing force 3 times more likely to experience force than white folks in this firearm display data. Next, we have soft empty hand control. Again, we're showing these like disparity ratios for soft empty hand control, and this difference also we can see is stark as we added that variable in 2022. Next, these graphs will show annual force incidents against youth by race. This was one of our more important findings, I think, of this study, was when we started looking at the force being used against minors. We saw that Black youth were overrepresented in the data to a larger degree than Black adults were. So in this graph, we're seeing that Black youth are 9.79 times more likely to be recipients of use of force as compared to white youth, and Hispanic youth are 1.19 times more likely to be recipients of force. And we see these trends continue concerningly with firearm displays. We're seeing a lot of Black youth having firearms pulled on them over the course of this data set. We can tell that this is when the firearm displays were added in 2019. It's a really important variable to track. And the numbers behind this graph are that Black youth firearm displays pulled against them at a rate 14 times more likely than white youth. We see this trend also continue with soft empty hand control usages, and this one represents 8.93 times more likely that Black youth are at the receiving end of a gun from a MMPD officer, or from soft empty hand control. So both of these facts and figures, I think, are really important to highlight some of those issues that Director Fitchard has displayed historically, and to think about how our police department is interacting with youth in our city across the board. Similarly, we decided to look into what school resource officers were doing in schools and their force interactions with youth. And we saw overwhelmingly that the officers who were involved in these incidents were white males, with some black males also being involved, much fewer rates of white and black females. And we saw that 95.6% of these use of force interactions in schools were against black youth, and 58%, 57.7% were against black girls, which is a very disturbing trend, especially, and diverges from that of the data with adults. When looking at adult data, it's mostly males who are at the receiving end of force, but we're seeing in schools that it's mostly black girls who are at the receiving end of force, which is definitely something that was highlighted throughout the fall as we did public forums and talked to community members as something that we wanted to continue to look into what was going on in these schools to lead to those concerning numbers. Given the racialized implication and use of dogs and canines in policing, especially against folks of color, we wanted to also break down the use of canines by race. This trend also showed that disparity ratio above and beyond what would be expected when benchmarking against arrestee data, and we're seeing that of these 82 total canine interactions also, 15 were against youth, 12 of which were against youth of color. Next, we kind of broke down what the officer side of things, so that was all subjects of use of force, but on the officer side, we're seeing a tendency that male officers are using force much more than female officers. They had used force 7.24 times as compared to 4.58 times for female officers, and then also breaking down racial demographics of officers who had used force. So Asian officers using force the least with 4.40 times on average, and white officers using force the most with 7.22 times on average. These demographics on the right tell a little bit more information about all of these individuals also who are using force most frequently. So we're seeing 97% being male, 85% being white, and mostly officers either from the Community Services Bureau, which are the precinct patrol officers, and the Investigative Services Bureau, which captures a lot of those more specialized investigations, violent crime divisions, and the like. Next, we ran a series of regression analyses to determine what different variables could be used to predict the level of force used in an interaction. So some of the variables included were resistance level, subject race, subject age, officer age, subject sex, and officer sex, as reported by MMPD in the data set. We ran these regression models in a stepwise fashion, which means adding one variable after the other to build a complete, robust model. And each were checked for all these different statistical standards to make sure that they fit into acceptable data use. And anything that, so in the data, there were a lot of folks who did not have resistance coded because of how MMPD records their data. So for these analyses, all of those individuals were excluded, anybody who had a resistance level of 0. And this is something that if you see it in the report, this is a conversation we had back and forth with MMPD about how they reported their data and how, trying to have an accurate analysis and an accurate representation of how they reported their data. So this is the way that we decided collectively to move forward with that specific point. Some of the findings I'll highlight from that analyses are that resistance is consistently a statistically significant predictor of a force level. So as resistance increase, force is going to increase as well. We also had several models that showed the following things, including that male officers are use significantly more force relative to non-male officers, that white officers use higher levels of force than non-white officers, and that white officers are significantly more likely to injure subjects in the course of an interaction as compared to non-white officers. Next, we looked at force usage by location across Davidson County. So this map shows areas of lighter color are fewer force usages, and as the color gets darker, that means there's more force usages in that area. So we can see some of these high force usages areas concentrated in North Nashville, Bordeaux, also down South Nashville, Antioch area. And we thought that this was important to compare to demographic information about these different parts of Nashville. So on the left, we have a map that shows the percentage of the population that are non-white, with the colors increasing as you go along. And similarly, on the right is a map of the percentage of the population in poverty. As the color gets darker, again, that's more people under the poverty line in that area of the city. And we mapped use of force on top of these yellow dots indicate the number of force incidents in the area. As the dot gets bigger, means more force usages. And so we can see that there's pretty consistent trends of higher force usages used in these areas that have higher concentration of non-white folks, and that similarly maps along the lines of poverty as well on the right. So this is something we definitely want to dig into more with the data and how MMPD is interacting with folks depending on neighborhoods. And that leads me into kind of the last point of data analysis, which is our community feedback from our public forum. So for every big final report that we present as the COB and now CRB, we host a public forum to get input from community members about the report and about any recommendations or changes that they have. And a couple of the things that were highlighted from the use of force public forum were a tendency for officers to demonstrate bias against people of color in interactions, a perception of unnecessary escalations in officer use of force, differential treatment from officers based on the location where incidents occur in the city, a need for greater training around cultural humility and working with immigrant and disabled community members. And overall, community members were demanding that MMPD have just fewer interactions between community members and the police to lessen the chance of these interactions being violent and escalating to the use of force. With that feedback and the data in mind, we'll make the following recommendations. I'll go through these kind of quickly, but they're in more detail in the report. But first, MMPD should expand what they report on their use of force dashboard online to include soft empty hand control, taser displays, and accidental discharges. MMPD should modify its use of force training types in their reporting and tracking of resistance levels. MMPD should randomly audit instances from 2022 onwards when officers used force and resistance was not tracked. And so that was that point of contention that I mentioned where resistance wasn't being consistently tracked on all of the MMPD data forms. MMPD should create a peer review panel to look at cases of excessive force. And then 4A, MMPD should use a comparative method based on force and resistance to basically flag individuals where there seems to be a big disparity between the level of force and the level of resistance used. And that should be incorporated into the early intervention system that MMPD uses. Recommendation 5, MMPD should expand their use of force policies and training specific to interactions with youth. There's a bunch of standards on kind of how to train officers to interact with youth, and so we have some suggestions of how that could be modeled in the report. Recommendation 6, that MMPD should notify CRB staff every time MMPD use force in a Metro Nashville public school. Recommendation 7, that MMPD should supplement its existing fair and impartial policing training module with additional training on cultural humility and interactions with diverse populations, and to include trainers who live in the community and who are external to MMPD on that kind of panel. And then 7B, similarly, that MMPD should modify that training to include training specifically on neighborhood-based bias, so thinking about officers going into a neighborhood and having a certain perception about that community before they go in, but having more intimate training with folks from that neighborhood, not only as a part of their training within the academy so they can get acquainted with Davidson County, but also so they can have this recurring in their in-service training if they move precincts or like need a refresher for how things are going in their community specifically that they're serving. Recommendation 8 is that MMPD should train recruits and officers in procedural justice principles. 9, that MMPD should modify its use of force forms to include checkboxes for de-escalation techniques, so we're also tracking kind of how a force incident progresses instead of just seeing, oh, they pulled a firearm, oh, they used soft empty hand control, but seeing the whole, getting a better picture of the whole story that led up to the force incident. Recommendation 10, MMPD should modify its de-escalation policy to include specific stipulations on procedural justice, really focusing on active and empathetic listening, nonverbal communication, word choice, and other kind of techniques that may help lessen the chance of escalating these encounters to a use of force incident. Recommendation 11, that MMPD should provide non-confidential databases to NCRB as were provided to MNCO to allow us to continue to audit use of force practices. And recommendation 12, that MMPD should continue its focus of recruitment on non-white and female candidates until the department is saturated with folks that are kind of represent the demographics of Nashville, Davidson County better. From all of that research and all of that data collection, we had a lot of other questions come up throughout the process. Some of these I mentioned throughout the report, but looking more into school resource officers, looking into officer demographics further, analysis of settlement costs, analysis of that location data, greater in-depth look into bias-based policing are all ideas that came out of this report and could be future topics of inquiry should the CRB decide that that's something we want to look into. And with that, I will take any questions on that full report or on this presentation. Thank you all.
Gracie, that was an excellent report. Director Fitchard, your presentation leading up to the report, that was excellent as well. Great job once again, per usual. And so do we have any questions or comments from the board? Member Nguyen.
Thank you, Gracie, and a very good report. I just wanted to ask you, when you talk about benchmarking, so you're looking at other communities with similar problems and hopefully be the similar solutions. But would you agree this is a nationwide problem, especially with SROs?
Yes, I think that we're seeing trends in SROs across the country. A lot of community feedback that we're receiving is just some concern about how they're interacting with students, and something we definitely want to look into more. I know it's been a topic of big debate following the Covenant shooting here in Nashville last spring, and so it's definitely something that we want to tread carefully into that topic and understand, all the sides of that issue. But it is, these preliminary looks at this data do look a bit concerning from what we've been able to find so far.
So of the cities that you've looked at, is there a comparable city with the same demographics that this has been brought to the attention of the government and the police department, that this is a problem, a disparity in use of force against the population? Did they take that, report and then analyze it and then tell the community why these numbers are so high? Has there been a counter to this kind of report from any police department that you know of?
Not that I know of. I think most of the data around policing in schools and school resource officers is based solely on students' perceptions and more qualitative data. There's not a lot of quantitative data coming out of these kinds of like school resource officer debates. It's mostly qualitative. So I think I haven't read anything that's directly kind of how we started to look at SROs as in this report, but definitely could be a topic of further study.
It's not a good comparison, but Minneapolis took all their SROs out of their public schools.
Yes, I did see that.
It's a unique city for a lot of reasons. But, I wanted to ask you something else. I see bias and implicit, and explicit is not in the report. You've got implicit. But have you been able to examine a detailed curriculum of the police department that addresses bias in policing on all topics for line officers, line supervisors, or leaders in the department? Is there an existing curriculum where they sit in a classroom and talk about the science of bias and how it impacts all uses of force and the way policing's done here in Nashville?
So currently, I've done some looking into the department's curriculum on bias. It's mostly been in our sexual misconduct report and not directly in the use of force report. But as I remember, shifting gears to that report, they have right now, I think, 8 hours of fair and impartial policing training. And that is kind of the core, it seems, of like concentrated bias training. I know that their de-escalation training is kind of scattered throughout other training materials, and I think that some of the bias type stuff is also scattered throughout training materials, but it definitely seems, this is a topic that we would like to dig into a bit more, especially with your expertise on bias training, Board Member Wen, but I think that's definitely something in repeated reports that we are seeing could have some areas of improvement.
So the police department does not have a standalone bias policing policy like the IECP recommends. Okay.
I was going to ask this question in regard to that. Did you get any information from their, their annual in-service training? I think that they also do that once a year. I don't know how it operates, but.
Yeah, so their annual in-service training looks a bit different. I can't remember exactly what the fair and impartial policing segment of in-service looks like. They do a lot of recaps on a lot of the topics that we looked into for sexual misconduct were DV type stuff, domestic violence type trainings, different trainings on responding to violent crimes, and they do have in-service blocks for most of those things, but they are obviously, since they're in-service training and not having that concentrated time in the academy, cut rather short. So I couldn't give you an exact hour estimate.
So you don't know how many hours the recruits get? You say 8?
8 for fair and impartial policing, I believe, in that block. There may be other blocks, so don't quote me on that, but I can definitely look into that and get back to y'all on that specific.
And you don't know about in-service, which is 40 hours every year for every officer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure what fair and impartial is allotted during that time.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, it started with the school resource officer. It started, I think, back the time when Chief Surpass was the chief of police, and it called stats. And what the officer in school resource was doing, it was citing kids for stuff that could be handled internally in the school, because it happened to my grandson, and there was a fight, and he had just turned 18. And they wrote him a state citation, which is something could have been handled different by taking him to the principal's office, And so these officers want to maintain a little cushion job, straight days and weekend all, and showing that they really document stuff, making citations and doing all these different things to make them look good. When stats come around on weekend, they say, well, We've done all these type of enforcement. We've really done it. We deserve to be there. But it's not. There's a lot of things could have been held internal within the school instead of bringing to the juvenile court or to the police department. And secondly, the democratic, what you mean, we've always said we want the police department to reflect the community. We've always said that. And Commander Larry, we asked him, whoever's the assistant chief over there, the bureau, to come to one of our meeting. We did it in April one year, and we asked him if they can come in June. We give him money in between time to get his vacation stuff squared away. I don't know if Commander Larry even referred the information, but this is going on 2 years and no one has showed up yet. So that's the kind of communication that we get. And then again, we also look at the hiring process. You're hiring people in these little small towns that are not used to the demographic makeup of Davidson County. And they come here and act like they John the law, you know. And they ain't got to respect anyone. And we have always said you hire where you need, where you go to where you need. And if you're going to have black officers, you go where you got university of graduating people every year. People needing jobs. Do you go down and recruit? No. You rather go out of town somewhere in a little small town, you may have 100 black folk living in that town. You know, you're not going to recruit what you ain't looking for. That's what I'm saying. And there need to be some changes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Holloway, for those excellent points. I think one thing I will say, in looking at school resource officers, I'm really sorry that happened to your grandson, and happy, though, that you shared that story, because I think that's something that's been highlighted multiple times through discussions with MMPD and MMPS, that they are stating that all disciplinary measures should be handled by the school and not by the officer. So it's important to note when those things are not happening like that, and to note instances where MMPD is handling discipline or where officers are handling discipline that's supposed to be handled at the school level. So that's definitely something we could consider looking into further.
Member Beard.
When the report first came out, I took some time and I worked with the research team, and I gave a number of very detailed comments. I read that report the first time, page by page, sentence by sentence, line by line. I'm gonna take my mask off because I want everyone to hear what I got to say. This is Black History Month, and this is the year 2024. Before slavery, I want everybody to understand this. We, Black people in Africa, were doctors, landowners, kings, lawyers, politicians. We were people of high standard and regard. We ran our own countries. We did not need anyone's help. And slavery came. You stripped African-American men from their manhood. You stripped women of their being queens. You put them down to very mental low status. You had men, Black men, having to wear "I am a man" sign for you to even appreciate them being a man. You had Jim Crow laws, you had the KKK that you didn't stop. You had the Civil Rights era where you wouldn't even let African-American men and women have correct employment. You discriminated against them from getting jobs. You have continually placed guns, as this report says, in the face of our youth, not only the men, the young men, but the young women. So how do you think their emotionally and physical and mental health is? Why do you think you see less Black men in corporate America and more in jail? What do we have to do to end the continued systematic disparities against Black men and women? You're degrading our young Black and women in the schools. You're degrading them in their homes. You're degrading them as they become adults. And you're putting them in jail in disproportionate numbers. This has a correlation to social determinations of health, of employment levels, to social and economic classes, to education levels. How much more does the Black man and the Black woman have to face? This is Black History Month 2024. And this report shows, if this data, I'm gonna take this data as the truth, it's not that we're making this up. We're not saying that our people, that African American people are treated unfairly because it's a myth in our minds. It's the truth. I told an attorney that I worked with in FedEx in Memphis. She was an African American female. They had an incident similar to what we had here in Nashville that started this board. She lived in a very affluential part of Memphis, probably one of only Black families that lived in that neighborhood. And I told her after this incident happened, your son is going to be stopped one day, and you need to prepare him. Oh no, Mary, he's not going to be stopped. This does not happen. This is not reality for us. That only happens in certain neighborhoods in the city, certain crime areas, certain zip codes. And what call did I get in the middle of the night? Devastated. What do I do, Mary? Because now my son has been stopped. Traumatic for him. He was sheltered. His parents didn't teach him what he needed to know as a young Black man living anywhere in America. But this report, it has struck a nerve. It should strike a nerve of anyone who has a conscience for humanity and respect for humanity. These are people's sons, daughters. These are future mothers. These are future fathers. And you are using your authority to change the trajectory of their lives. They need to be punished. They need to be disciplined. It's not a question of when or doing these peer reviews or whatever. If the facts are the facts, it just needs to be done. I agree with all the recommendations, but my heart is heavy. Maybe because I've done so many Black History events this month, but my heart is heavy for my people. And I have friends that I've had for all my life that don't look like me, that don't have the same religion as I do, that are not the same race as I am, do not have the same political affiliation that I do. I'm a lover of people and respect for people. This report shows that at some level, in some aspect, you are losing respect for people, for humanity. And that's the problem. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Member Beard. Thank you for conveying your thoughts, but also your passion. I would dare to say, and thank you, Member Holloway and Member Wynn, for your comments. I think we've been sitting with this report, this use of force report, for many months now. And after reading it and rereading it and just refining some points, it will strike a nerve. It will become very personal for some of us, just because I was once a black girl, right, in school, in high school, in MNPS. And so I know what that's like. And to still talk about the adultification of youth, essentially black and brown youth in our schools, it's not enough. Right? We're past conversations. I think what this report is saying is that we have to do something about it. But then also using antiquated systems, such as canines, in my opinion, when we are continuing to sick dogs on human beings as a means of control. I think it's time for us to look a little bit more deeply in how we use force on human beings. And so as we take this report and we continue to sit with it, and as we disseminate it within our communities, I think it will call for all of us to lend our voices to it. The recommendations are great, right? Recommendations 5 and 6 and 9, and I have my favorites, but at the same time, I think all of us, we have something to lend to this report and to these recommendations. And so it shouldn't just stop at our desk, shouldn't stop within our hands. This report needs to live, it needs to breathe. It needs to have legs, it needs to walk, it needs to talk. And I think that is what we have in front of us, a product that is living and breathing, and a product that we can be very proud of, but then also it's so much that can come out of it, as you put in your presentation. Member Nguyen.
Yeah, this could be questions for either you, Chair, or Director Fitchard. When will this report be presented to the police department?
After we finalize it here and whatever recommendations that you guys accept, hopefully all of them, then we will present it to the police department, the mayor's office, and whatever else. I think the council gets it. They have I think they have the draft version, but the final version will go out probably tomorrow, or
As soon as we.
yeah, as soon as we finalize it, tomorrow, or at the latest Wednesday.
So, in the last question, under the new regulations from the state legislature, are they prohibiting us to make this recommendation to the police department?
I don't think so, based on what Laura Fox mentioned, because it was precipitated by a act and a complainant. And so that's how we were able to develop the report.
And are you speaking, Member Nguyen, of more of the policy recommendations versus personnel recommendations? So if we can still make policy recommendations?
Well, I hope.
Yes.
I mean, if we are a true review board, we look at patterns and practices within the police department and offer a
That's
higher
right.
standard. If we're prohibited from offering a higher standard, then the power of this board has just been completely eliminated, in my opinion.
We are not prohibited from offering our policy recommendations and our standards.
And it has to come from an exact complaint, correct?
That's correct. And I think there was there's continuing discussion regarding complaints, how we take those complaints and then we come up with the policy reports and advisory reports versus issues that have been raised by the community. And so we're still talking and working through what that actually looks like pertaining to the law. So we brought that conversation up with the Metro Law Department, and so we're still, talking through that, because it's very clear that policy recommendations or policy advisory reports can come from complaints, but what about complaints that have arisen from community organizations, community members, things like that, that aren't tied to complaints necessarily?
And director-initiated complaints.
And director-initiated policy reviews and advisory reports.
So, sorry, it just occurred to me. So we don't have the data from the public school systems, do we? We don't know how often a school teacher has notified an SRO of a problem, like Member Holloway said, could have been handled a different way. So we don't know their numbers, nor do we know the kind of training that public school teachers get on bias. That's the two questions I have for you, Gracie.
No, we don't. So back when we were still the COB, Gavin, or former lead research analyst, and I worked on drafting a policy advisory report proposal on school resource officers. And so we began kind of delving into what data would be available and have some recommendations around things we could pull. But with the new law regarding complaints having, or policy reports having to come from complaints, we didn't know whether or not to present that to you all yet. And so that is waiting in the queue and something we could do based on kind of what we hear from Metro Legal about whether community recommendations can be cause for policy advisory reports. But that is something that we have pretty much ready to go if that were something that the community was still wanting to look into.
Good. All right. Any additional comments or questions? Member Brown, you don't have any, you're ready to? I thought that's what you would want.
I'll make a motion that the report be approved, and that we issue a supplemental report, when data is available from 2023. This report has all 2022. Obviously, it takes time to get data from 2023, but I would think we should supplement our report February or March of 2024 to take into account new data and hopefully action taken by the Metropolitan Police Department to consider and hopefully adopt our recommendation.
So you're essentially saying you want to recommend this report for finalization and leave for an update with updated data and any kind of other information that pertains to this use of force report. Okay.
Chair, if I may. Oh, sorry. I would just, quick comment on that data. So that the reason that we didn't do an update for 2023 yet is because the data that we receive for the use of force report was in our weekly data drops that we got from MMPD when we were still the COB. That data has not been delivered to us since June 30th of 2023 because of kind of MMPD's understandings of the data sharing requirements. So that's just a note for why that has not progressed in that direction yet.
So could we add into, is there any way that in the supplemental report that we can, as a board, you guys can request the data so that we can continue to get that information?
And I was going to suggest that we maybe include that as we are doing our MOU negotiations and.
100%.
Okay.
Let me
That's
ask
what I
you,
thought.
have we asked for the 2023 data, or just it hadn't shown up the way it usually has?
So when the data stopped coming, I believe we had some conversations around why the data had stopped coming, and those resulted in the data not continuing to come.
So the conversation wasn't completed.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to modify my motion to simply approve the report as presented.
Okay. All right.
Pick up the other, as Member Holloway said, and our MOU. Not Holloway.
It's me. It's Chair Haddock. It's okay, Member Brown. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a second. All in favor for accepting and finalizing the use of force report, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, we have a use of force report.
Thank you all. We appreciate it.
Okay. So we will now move on to our board discussions. First up is the FY '25 CRB budget. Who wants to, you are the budget chair, Member Goddard, and then, Director Fitchard, if you want to chime in.
All right. Yes, the budget at this point is, and Jill, please interrupt and comment if I see some of this wrong, the process. We are in the process, we are submitting an anticipated budget, or a forecasted budget, I think is the word they use in the budgeting process, to Metro Finance to start working on a budget. This is for the fiscal year that starts July 1 later this year, so we're several months in advance of that. What was shot around recently, Friday or Saturday, was the revised budget that came out of the Budget Committee and Executive Committee considerations with two questions I had. One, Joe, I didn't anticipate him doing this, but happy he did, with the questions with Legal Director Dietz on how much need we would actually have for finances. My recollection of the Executive Committee discussion was there are two close related columns, and money can basically flow between the two. One was professional services and one was management consultant. And originally we had $250 total between those two. And I mean, I think some thought 50 was fine if we didn't have to pay any legal fees, but I thought we wound up with 150, sort of halfway between those two. Is that your recollection?
It was between 150 and 200,000, and so I know we reduced it from 250,000.
200 was the total,
200.
yeah.
We
From
would,
200 to 150.
it was 200 to 150, so didn't we agree on 150?
I thought we agreed on 150 total between those two line items.
Right.
What Jill just described is the one line item.
Okay.
The professional services line item.
So it was $100,000 for professional services and then 50,000 from management consulting.
Right. Okay.
That's not what's on here, is it?
No,
It's
it's not.
200,000, okay.
Yeah, so that's what would change. And then the other is there was what was discussed at the Budget Committee without objection and at the Executive Committee without objection was a 10% raise budgeted at this point. And we got to be
Yes.
careful for this for the executive directors. As with all Metro boards and commissions, the head staff person, the head of the staff has a salary set by the board. It's not part of civil service. This is just to put something in the budget right now. That will be, Jill, I learned this today from you, it's helpful. The actual setting of your salary will come after review and then sometime before the start of the fiscal year, but I don't know, May, June, somewhere in there, is that right? A board vote?
Yeah, you got to get it has to be attached with usually it's an evaluation and the, whatever percentage you guys
But it's
come
in that time frame. My point is, we're not locking that in right now.
That's correct.
Yeah, and what was noted was a 10% increase in both the Budget Committee and the Executive Committee. And there were two, a 10 and a 15 were shown on the budget. So what I think we should consider today is what was shot around with those two clarifications, 150 on those first two lines for professional services and consultant, and then the 10% increase. Again, just budgeted for now until we get to see where we are for the executive director.
Okay.
Do you want to say something about that? Okay.
Do you,
Couture wanted to speak about the
Please.
budget since she operated it. Thank you.
Good evening, board members. So my position with the CLB, I'm going to introduce myself. Katora Barnett is Administrative Service Manager, and I assist Jill with the finance and budget process for our department. So I have assisted her with putting together this budget and the budget that was sent to you all to review for this meeting. And just following up on the comments that Board Member Goddard stated, at the executive meeting, it was asked that we amend the budget that was provided to you guys before, so the numbers will reflect what was actually proposed to the mayor's office, because we did submit our budget February 9th as instructed by the mayor's office. And the budget modifications that we have been working with our budget analysts, those have been adjusted since we've, the first time that you guys were initially provided the CRB budget, and we wanted to make sure that you had an updated copy of what was actually provided to the mayor's office. Additionally, for the full-time positions that were also listed on, attached to that worksheet, Member Goddard requested that we reflect what a 10% increase, merit increase for Director Fisher would look like. At the Budget Committee meeting, there was a comment made, and I believe Chair Haddock stated to see what it would look like also at a 15% increase. So I included both of those because there have been conversations that Director Fitchard has had with the board members, the chair committee members of that budget committee in regards to an executive director is allowed up to a 15% increase. So that was put on the report just so you guys as a board could see what it would look like if Director Fitchard received a 10% increase or all the way up to a 15% increase, which is allowed by the board. But I do want to state, which was already stated previously before I got up here, that that is a separate decision of the board. Merit increases for Director Fitchard would have to be voted on by the board, and agreeing to what you guys see on the budget right now has nothing to do with the budget that we submitted. So even if we do submit a budget, the budget that we submitted, even whatever you guys decide or agree upon to give Director Fitchard, for a merit increase, those funds will come out of whatever budget we currently have at the moment when we begin the budget for fiscal year 25. So if we have the funds or don't have the funds, would you guys have a separate vote in regards to the budget that we submit regarding her merit increase? And I wanted to make sure that you guys were clear on that. The 10% and the 15% was just for you guys to see what it would look like. And also, was also included in there was a 2% increase for staff, which was reflective of a budget modification that we submitted to the mayor's office requesting a 2% increase for staff. And that is only something that would be provided per the discretion of Director Fitchard based off of performance evaluations of staff. And of course, that would be like an annual performance evaluation. So none of these things are immediate increases that would be provided. And I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of those. Yes.
I want to make
yes.
two comments
Yes.
and a question. Very important to me, the 10% came from y'all, Executive Fitchard. I did,
Right.
I did take the 10%.
Right.
It's something that could have been interpreted perhaps as Drew decided on 10. That I want to be real clear is not what happened. And then the other is we are required under our, for sure under the bylaws in our bylaws we've adopted, I think, under perhaps of the statute to adopt a budget. So that's what I'm trying to do today is get us have an approved budget for that purpose, not what's been input in Metro Finance. The question is, are you saying we really don't have to say anything at this point about for budgeting purposes with Metro Finance about the executive director salary? We could just
Correct, about the merit increase, right.
Okay.
That's what
I'll
I'm
take that part
clarifying.
back. We'll just
Yes.
drop that line. That's
Yes,
fine. That's
and I
good.
agree, the 10% was a suggestion that was provided via email. But as I stated, I just wanted to make sure you guys were able to see what it would look like at the suggestion and all the way up to what is actually
Thank you.
allowed.
That's helpful.
Yes,
Thank you.
okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, all right. Member Beard.
Yes, on the documentation we received today, it has here the salary and fringe is the second line, employee longevity pay. It's only $1,000. Is that based upon the city statute or?
No.
Or, I mean, why is that so low?
The longevity pay is based upon what employees we have in the office that are actually qualified to receive longevity pay. We only have one employee.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Right, but it is based up, you get like
Yes, a
$500
scale.
increments, yeah.
Okay.
I'm the only one that's entitled to longevity pay in the office right now, because I have
Right.
15 years of service.
And
longevity pay, if I'm correct, you have to have at least 5 years to
You
start.
do, and it's like $100, for each year. Is it, am I due 1,500 or is it 1,000?
No, so what you received last year?
No, I know what I received last year, but now I reached 15 years. Last year I was at 14.
Right, so
I might get another 500.
I do want to clarify, last year, during the fiscal year.
I think it's $100 a year.
Starting in year 5.
Yeah, when the
Yes.
longevity pay was provided to the employees, at that time, we had 2 employees that received it, which was Director Fitcher and our former Assistant Director. And now that the former Assistant Director is no longer with us, he had a significant amount of years as well. Director Fitcher is the only one in the office right now who receives that. And I do also want to mention that longevity pay has come out of our budget. It's just have been kind of like hidden within the regular pay line items. So in previous years, they've just taken that money from that regular pay account. But this year, we wanted to make sure that there was actually a separate line item for that, and it wasn't coming from regular salary pay.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for the explanation and getting us straight on when and where we come in the process, especially tied to the voting of the merit increase for the director. And then I have a question. So tomorrow there is a meeting, correct, for a Zoom meeting, okay, regarding the budget. And will we be talking about what's being presented in our hands now?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
You should have, it came from our budget analyst. It should be some documents in regards to the budget modifications that were provided to the mayor's office. And that is specific, that's one thing that we will be discussing with the mayor's office, just discussing the object accounts that we have requested to be increased. And giving justifications on why we are requesting those funds. Okay. Yes.
And so the only thing that needs to be corrected on here is the 100,000, or does something need to be corrected on this?
I believe, well, I'm gonna say what I think we need to do.
Okay.
If you think that works, I'll just say, I just made that as a motion. I think we need to adopt this budget as circulated most recently.
Okay.
To the board, with the one change that the line item for professional services is changed to 100,000.
Okay.
Decided that's 150 total with the manager consultant. Okay. And that we are not taking any action today with respect to the executive director's salary.
Correct. Right.
So moved.
All right. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a second. All in favor? All right, okay, we have a budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you guys. No, you're fine. No, you're okay.
Thank you, Ms. Barnett.
And Drew, tomorrow when we have our meeting, I don't know who's gonna be there, we need to let, the committee know that we're reducing, whatever object code number that is, 5022, whatever it is.
And I plan on being on the Zoom and being quiet unless you call on me for something, so if you're expecting me to say
Remember
something.
Goddard being quiet.
If you're
Yeah,
expecting
Okay.
me to say something, let me know. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we will move on to the MOU discussion. I know we talked a little bit about the MOU previously tonight. You're the MOU chair. How did you become chair of the budget and the MOU?
You'd have to ask the chair that.
Oh, okay.
The MOU committee, I described earlier the process we're going through a little more generally and substantively. I think we're going to have a number of issues that we can work through. I think we're going to have some we just hit a wall and we in the police department disagree on a matter of law. And then I think some of those and perhaps some others are going to become more political issues. And I view the role of the MOU committee as to work through as best we can workable situations for us that the police department can agree to, that's workable for them on as many points as possible, and then try to clarify as much as possible the specific disagreements we have on the things we can't agree to, and circle wagons at that point and see where we go again, thinking that there may be some political aspects to that, if that makes sense.
Okay. Member Beard.
The meetings that we're having, these committee meetings, subcommittee meetings, can they be by Zoom?
I do not believe so,
They cannot be.
because,
Because we're having
the
a
Open
budget meeting
Meetings
tomorrow
Act.
by Zoom.
Say it one more
They're
time.
having a budget meeting tomorrow by Zoom.
This is with the, Finance Department.
Okay.
Yes,
Let me say, the meeting tomorrow is a finance department
Okay.
meeting, and only one, we'll manage
But
that.
it's a city, it's a city
Well, that's true.
function.
And the, it's, yeah, that's.
No,
correct. If
so
it-
But she's
our
talking
meeting,
about
our,
Open
committee
Meetings
meetings
Act.
are open to the public.
It's with finance and, someone from the mayor's office, like the performance management.
Yeah, you, yeah, I'm just worried, I'm just, the bigger question of whether we can have these meetings by Zoom.
Let me
Right.
say, I've actually had some experience with this on another board. In the state of Tennessee, you have to have, it's state law, you have to have the meeting, all that. There is an ability to do an electronic meeting if you make a statement of necessity, if that's voted on as the very first thing in the meeting, and you declare that there's some set of decisions or something has to happen, and that time prohibits us from finding a time when everybody can get together. But if you do that, you then have to set up electronically for the public people to dial in. You have to tape the meeting and keep the tape, and there's one other requirement. So it can be done, but it takes a good bit of advanced prep to make that happen.
okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. I know that after the pandemic, we received, everyone did, received a notification from the governor's office, explaining electronic meetings and when they were, and it seemed to be prohibited, but I don't know if there's any.
There was a governor's order,
Yeah.
and it
an
may have just been
executive
out of the
order.
legislature that basically said you can do all your meetings virtually during the pendency of the pandemic.
Yeah, and
And then each of those orders was for a certain period. It got renewed a couple of times, and they've all expired. So that option's not out there. We're back to the basic statute.
Yeah, so that was the impression that I was under, is that since we are out of the pandemic, that we are now prohibited from doing, any virtual meetings, and so we're back to in person. And then, of course, the Open Meetings Act and all of the things.
Thank you so much.
So does that conclude your update on the MOU? Okay. Yes, and so I wanted to, Director Fisher, do you have the list of, board members who are on the, MOU committee? Because I do believe we added some people, and Member Beer, you are on.
I am on it, and I was
Okay.
in the middle of contract negotiations on Friday.
Okay.
And that's why I asked, could it
Okay.
be via Zoom, because I couldn't make the first part of the meeting, but I could have made the second part, but by the
Okay.
time I got there, from contract negotiation, you would have been done.
Okay,
So that's why I asked, but, I was in the midst of contract negotiations, so I'll just make sure that when the email comes out, I'll just block the times that are suggested until we get a final.
okay.
So I can have those blocked on my calendar. And then I guess my other question would be, from the meeting, is a new draft or the email that we received about the MOU, is that the draft from the meeting? I saw it
Update from what we
did on
No,
Friday.
I think I'm under compulsion to create a revision.
Okay.
It takes what we sent out before with the things we talked about at the meeting.
It has
Some
not
of those
been
are gonna
sent
be
yet.
specific changes, some of those are gonna be
Okay.
specific, these things won't be in it because it's outside the statute, and some will just be notes on, we need to talk further about this, but I intend to do that and get that out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. Any additional comments? Okay, let us move on to the mayor and chief meeting. And so we did discuss this at the executive committee meeting, where we will be sending out correspondence to the mayor and the chief regarding a meeting for March or April. And so we have already discussed that, and that is what we intend to do. So they will be receiving written correspondence, another piece of written correspondence, to request a meeting. And so that will be happening within the week or so.
Are you guys gonna draft it, or you want me to draft it? I can draft it.
We know you can draft it. Why don't you take a stab at it and send it to us, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay. Any additional commentary regarding the mayor and chief meeting? And we talked about it at length at the executive meeting. Remember when?
When was the election?
The election was, do you mean the mayor's election?
Yes, ma'am.
That was in August of 2023.
Oh, okay. Just, I wanted to clarify.
Oh, okay, yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
many months ago. And September was the runoff, and then October, I believe, was the inauguration of the new mayor.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mhm. So, let's see, the next item on the agenda is new business and announcements.
It's not necessarily new business, but I was asked to lead the
Yes,
sexual assault discussion, and we had scheduled that for March 12th. But I have to take the I have to go to community police training.
okay.
So we're gonna have to move that back, because I think it's the same, I think my training is on the same night, that if you still want me to lead it, I'm more than happy to.
I'm gonna have to write you a note.
An excuse? Yeah,
I'm more than
Mary, it's
happy to
you.
do it, but, you know,
Okay.
I'm trying to meet my legal obligations under the law.
I guess, maybe.
Okay.
Well, we do
All
have
right.
Director
Just
Morante
let-
here, you
Just
got
let me
to pull.
know, Director.
Kathy, what you gonna do for us?
Okay.
It's not my night to speak, she's excused.
Okay, all right, so, we will look into that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we should make the announcement about that on it's March. So the sexual, we're gonna, you wanna make the announcement? Go ahead, Gracie.
Thank you, everyone. So the Sexual Misconduct Public Forum will be hosted on March 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. at the East Park Community Center, and that will just look like a community conversation around that sexual misconduct report that I presented last month to review the findings and recommendations, have community input. So we invite anybody here and anybody listening at home, please come out and share any thoughts you have on that report.
And we will be sending invitations out, particularly to community organizations, but then community organizations that deal with sexual assault and any kind
Domestic
of sexual violence,
violence,
domestic violence issues. And so we are looking for a good attendance for that.
Yeah, I'm on the board of the Sexual Assault Center.
Yes.
And I have a board meeting on Wednesday, and I'm gonna plan on telling them and asking
Okay.
as many people to come. But please go ahead and send the formal
Yeah, we will.
correspondence, but I'm going to reiterate that at our meeting on Wednesday.
Thank you, Member Beard.
Yeah, and I think the Family Safety Center Director, Lance, has already reached out and gave us some feedback and,
Okay.
you know, talked about how she thought that it was an excellent report, which I think so too, so. Good job.
Okay. Any additional new business announcements, Director Fitchard? Okay. So we do have I do want to recognize, I know you already recognized Director Morante, but I do want to recognize that MNPD did send a representative to tonight's meeting, in place of Commander Laura. And so that has officially started back. So we do have a MNPD representative here tonight, and thank you for coming. Did you want to say anything, Director Morante?
No, I don't have any remarks. If there are
Okay.
any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Okay, thank you. All right. So if there's nothing else, Member Holloway, you don't have any?
Since you are representing the Commander Laura, and he has not done what we asked to do, and it's going on 2 years to find out who's bureau chief over the hiring procedure. All we want him to do is come and present to us the technique or what procedures are taking place for hiring employees and you know, what steps they're taking, you know, and, you know, whether they're getting lateral transfers classes or what, you know, because the department is short. When I did my training, school training, and it didn't take me 2 hours to figure out they were short. And I think I see it on TV a few weeks ago, it was 170 short, but he's more than that short.
Yes, sir. I will, first, I'd like to say that I suspect that, having worked with Commander Lara, that I suspect he did pass that along. I will go ahead and pass it on myself to Deputy Richter. I do know, just from being in the position I'm in, that they have gone to many, many, many different places in Nashville, and they're very active in trying to seek out applicants, but I will pass that along. And if any of you know of anybody that is interested at all in working for the department, you know, give them my name, give them Commander Lara's name, or Deputy Chief Richter, who is the Deputy Chief over training. We would love that.
The requirement is high school diploma, GED, college hour, what is it now?
You don't have to be a college graduate. You do come in at I believe, a higher rate of pay slightly if you are. I do believe you have to have a high school diploma. I'm not a recruiter myself, so, but I'm pretty certain that's correct. And again, I do teach out at the academy. I teach the law portion, and you know, we go ahead and we put on academy classes for as many people as we can get. Unfortunately, lately that number has just been smaller and smaller.
Well, the reason why I ask is because, you know, some applicants get washed out for a little amount of stuff. They almost washed me out for getting a parking ticket that I had paid for. And one guy on the board said, no, we're not going to do this young man like that. We hire people that have been arrested before, you know. But he got a parking ticket, you know, he was in college, you know, and he paid for it, so why are we going to hold him back?
I'm pretty certain that these days that nothing like that would come close to holding anybody back. I'm pretty certain, but
I don't know.
Like somebody from the department, again, Deputy Chief Richter is over, you know, the recruitment, among other things. I'm sure she could address
Who?
that. Deputy Chief Michelle Richter is the
That's
Deputy
my
Chief.
question.
Okay, thank
Well, all
you.
right, thank you. Thank you, Dr., I said doctor. Thank you, Director Morante. I will say that we would like to engage with Deputy Chief Richter.
I will pass that on.
Thank you so much. And then we'll have that person come, Member Holloway. Okay.
I did want to say that one thing, that, and it's, the video is posted now. I was invited to participate as a co-moderator with the Philadelphia Citizens Police Oversight Commission. It was called Her Story for
That's
Black
right.
History, and it had police women from Philadelphia. There was a lieutenant, there was a captain, there was a chief, and then there were some oversight practitioners on the call from Atlanta and New York. And I appreciate you all showing up. Mark Wynn was there, Chair Haddock, and some others from the community were there. And so it was good to see. It was a really wonderful conversation. I felt really excited to participate in the moderation. And then also it was just really nice to see very empowered women in leadership roles within the police community. So.
It was a great conversation, I will say that. And it really highlighted the involvement and the engagement of women in law enforcement, particularly Black women in law enforcement. So you would have been very, very happy, Member Holloway, because of the diversity that was displayed.
Well, I had a run-in with one of them. Went to Philadelphia last time I was there.
I can't imagine that. I can't. I don't believe it. So if that concludes our new business and announcements, all right. We know what's next on the agenda. All right, second. All in favor? This meeting is now adjourned.
All right, thank you. Turn your mics off.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.